here to talk about care principles, and the first thing I'm going to discuss is the Mid-Staffordshire NHS Foundation Trust Inquiry. All in all, it was 4 volumes long and 290 recommendations, 4 volumes, 1,781 pages, and it stemmed from an inquiry or an audit that stretched 50 months, which included 400 to 1,200 unnecessary deaths. One of the deaths in particular was the case of a female that didn't have insulin. She didn't have insulin and she died 11 days later. She came in after having a bike accident, and then they just lost her. There was no nurse to patient names. Like, there was no responsibility of a particular nurse for a particular patient. So one of the recommendations was that nurses that took responsibility individually for individual patients, and that wouldn't happen again. So the mortality in Stafford increased. The reason why it came under the microscope was because it's only a very small, it's not even a trust, it was just a small hospital, and they just ended up losing a lot of people over negligence. There was allegations that maybe the patient care was overridden by corporate interests. The managers in the hospital in Mid-Staffordshire were looking to promote this small hospital into a trust hospital for prestige, and obviously that would mean more money and more budget, but obviously that never happened. One of the finite points that was taken by the Robert Inquiry was that it found that the security guard had more jurisdiction and legislation against his conduct than the people who were, shall we say, wiping the bottoms of your beloved patient, stroke grandmother or whoever, in the actual wards themselves. In the wards of Staffordshire Hospital, there was obviously eyewitness accounts of harassment and uncaring nurses. The attitude was of bullying patients into doing things. There was neglect. Registered nurses and healthcare assistants were just blatantly not feeding patients at the right times and leaving them helpless. If they were immobile, they wouldn't help them by feeding them. Didn't allow for sanitation or going to the toilet. There was many cases of patients that were up to their waist in feces, leaving their whole body, for hours, for days, for weeks even. Requests for help and complaints were ignored. Medicine was prescribed, but for some reason it wasn't administered, and patients were discharged but unfit to go home, where some of them actually died at home. Those who were in hospital were often left unwashed and unfed. So if you can imagine that you've wet yourself, you've defecated on yourself many times over, unbelievable. A lot of these people died. Basic standards of care were not observed. There was no one monitoring. Chain of command were just keeping it quiet, and anything that was coming out from the bottom were told. The people at the bottom were told, just keep it quiet, don't say anything. Fundamental rights of dignity were denied to all of these people here, as you can see. Anyone else who did nothing. Recommendations by the Francis report was that they were held personally and criminally responsible for these people, for these patients, their death and their abuse, and just let them starve, let them lay in their own feces and urine. Yeah. The trust management. So anyway, so you've got those 3 there. So. The trust management, the actual people who were in charge of Mid-Staffordshire, the small hospital, it was found from the report that their leadership was inexperienced and overconfident. They were only interested in hitting government targets and forced expectations. Obviously, families weren't listened to. There was multiple warnings spotted and acted on. There was probably camera footage of what went on with people being neglected, people not even being cleaned. I mean, it's ridiculous. Information not shared, inadequate action taken, and the system failed in most essential duties. So you could read that, yeah. There was no follow through. There was no conscience of the consequences of what could happen, yeah, with people dying, not with the hospital being shut down. They were just literally a killing machine to reduce the number of healthcare workers, to save money, to put money aside so that they could be a trust, to show that they had a bigger budget than they had and that they were using the money more wisely than they were. It was just tolerated. This behaviour was tolerated if it remained a secret. Yeah? I'll just put up there. So, that's a little joke there with the nurse box. I won't bother with. Just ignore that. Senior managers care only about money to achieve foundation trust status. This delayed skilled nurses being recruited and drives towards the severe staff shortages. But of course, shortages would be saving them up to 40, 50 grand a year in training, in income, in employment wages, and so on. There was no urgency recorded from the management. They didn't seem to care that they were understaffed and that people were being neglected. Recommendation is the hospital boards should face dismissal immediately, and if they fail to provide minimum standards of safety and care, they should even face criminal proceedings. Yeah. Okay. So there was a lot of protests in Staffordshire at that time, in 2000 between 2010 to 2013, even before that. It was found that the patient groups and the MPs were inadequate. That there was a scandal because their involvement was mainly ununiformed. They were just untrained volunteers. They cared, but they had their own jobs and they had their own interests. It was said that there had been infighting even and dysfunctionality among the patient representatives, which caused, well, any intervention to be stunted. And also MPs heard what was going on. They heard that people were dying, yeah, but they just passed it on the information without acting on it or without investigating, which was ludicrous. So recommendations after that: patient groups adequately funded, training for inspections of wards, and ability to bring outside experts in. Today, I think that's been rectified. So you've got primary care trust now. So you've got that sacrifice. Right, so we'll just leave it on this page for a minute. So primary care trust. These are the GPs, the general practitioners that are around in the village of Staffordshire. They were well placed for raising concerns about poor care and following it through to the hospital to make sure that their patients were safe, as you've got a patient to doctor name, responsibility. But many didn't come forward, and nobody knows why. But they did come forward when there was the announcement of an investigation or an audit in mid-Staffordshire through Robert Francis QC, which is interesting. How they didn't come forward when it didn't seem to be a problem, and all of a sudden they're investigating it, and then they're coming forward. Recommendations for that kind of act: they need to recognise the continuing obligations to their patients in a hospital where they are vulnerable, and they could be lost amongst the crowd of patients if there's no responsibility, especially if they've referred them to the hospital, where many of them died. These bodies now, primary care trusts, they don't exist anymore. They've been disbanded, obviously because of this, so community groups should monitor. And so it's found that they've been replaced now by GP-led commissioning groups, but these are all kind of authorised by the government and legislated and vetted. There's no, they have they have more than an obligation just to make money or just to be for one patient. They're doing all patients now as a kind of as a small group, I think it's a cabinet group or something. Commission groups should monitor all hospitals where they send their patients, including pro-qualified checks on quality of service offered and outcomes. So, yeah, like with feedback, thorough feedback, what happens now is that these commissioning groups go into the hospital and they don't declare themselves to everybody. And what they're doing is they're looking to do quality checks on the amount of healthcare treatment and also the quality of it, and also sanitation and how patients feel about their treatment, and whether things are any different. And if they're not different, then obviously people will not lose their jobs, but they'll come into criticism, and they might even be taken for further investigation in the NMC. Anyway, a strategic health authority, which are the people who were they're to do with the funding in Staffordshire, they were responsible for the running and safety of the hospital. They were accused of making no link between its financial role and the patient care, which is quite ridiculous. Obviously, the financial role of spending money was directly responsible for patient deaths. Yeah? The strategic, or SHA, as I'll call it, job-led 5 development of local health, managing primary pool trusts and NHS on basis of local accountability agreements, right? So, SHA saw its role. What ended up happening was it ended up defending the trust for saving money, right? And they went right against the Healthcare Commission, who were trying to find where they spent the money and why they didn't spend money on nurses and why there was a staff shortage and why patients were dying as a result. So they ended up when the Healthcare Commission were when the Healthcare Commission were trying to hold the trust to account, or the small hospital to account, SHA, the Strategic Health Authority, were backing the hospital in their decision to hold back the money and not spend it on staff. And they probably made up excuses as well that they just couldn't get the people to be recruited. Yeah, that they probably needed more money to get overseas workers or something like that, just as an excuse. Recommendations now is that obviously these bodies have been disbanded and they no longer exist. There must be So there must be no distinction between the finances of a hospital and good patient care, because the two are related, obviously. So in future, there's no distinction between the two, because money buys beds, treats patients, and provides care. So the Healthcare Commission, here they are, and the Quality Care Commission, there they are, they're the logos. During this period, both responsible for assessing and reporting on standards of patient care across the NHS. That's quite a lot of hospitals. HCC, the Healthcare Commission, did not have the funds to run a thorough complaints unit, as they allege, relying far too much on hospital self-assessments in making its findings and decisions. So the Healthcare Commission would just call up a hospital and just ask them, how are you doing? And then they just send a report, facts or whatever, of their current position. So they never ever went there themselves in most cases, because obviously there's far too many hospitals and they're probably short-staffed as well, and they just make up the excuse that they don't have the funds. So then the Care Quality Commission took over from the HCC, and then you had other kind of excuses coming through, like they didn't have the resources, and the investigations that were being appointed were not really, they weren't able to follow through on them because they didn't have the money to pay for the people to go around to the hospitals that were seen as mortality increasing or problems where there were being allegations of neglect and abuse. So therefore there were not enough inspections carried out, and an unhealthy culture started to emerge, it was alleged, where senior managers were more concerned with how they looked with doing the job, so they were just kind of promoting themselves as caring and doing their job, like, you know, and all that was going on was really they weren't really putting any effort into the job itself. Recommendations now, a specialist cadre or small group, of hospital inspectors were to be formed with patient involvement to identify problems earlier or just straight away. Okay, let's have a little drink. Department of Health, right? So we've got the Department of Health, so they seem to be quite remote, yeah? They weren't really, it was found that they weren't really to be blamed of any direct responsibility from the failing of Stafford, but the fact was that they put undue pressure on the hospital to deliver results, and they didn't seem to be very flexible, and people in the hospital and other health professionals have accused the Department of Health of being quite repressive and bullying in what they want, and they just didn't really, they were really kind of out of touch with what was going on the front line at the time, yeah? So recommendations from the Francis report would be no more middle manager promotions, no more top-down reordering, just very simply that the senior clinicians that are, very importantly, senior clinicians or top GPs or surgeons should be involved in the policies and the principles that are laid out in the DOE, yeah? And also, that DOE staff in the headquarters in London should go out there and see what it's like on the front line, so that they can grasp an idea of the problems and the extremities that nurses and healthcare assistants and so forth are faced with on a daily basis, which is quite important, I think. Right, okay, on to the next section. Right, and still with me, still alive, good. Right, let's go on to Jane Cummins, Professor Jane Cummins, that's the lovely lady in the middle there, surrounded by nurses and healthcare assistants and probably doctors. Just a year before the inquiry, in 2012, the 6 C's were launched by Professor Jane Cummins, who happens to be a director of the NHS. It was a 3-year vision. I don't know if she is aware of the Staffordshire problem or the hospital, but it came at a funny time. Anyway, it was a strategy for nursing, midwifery, and care staff, and it was kind of trying to sort of answer the idea that whether the NHS cared or not, and whether they could be justified to carry on the way they are in the public sector. Anyway, it was to get back the essence of what great care means, patients, how we can put changes in place and make real improvements for patients and staff. The launch took 8 weeks, and there was over 9,000 nurses involved, midwives, care staff, you name it, anyone that cared was in there. I wasn't in there, but still. What came out clearly was everybody thought that there was like compassion in practice, yeah? Which is ironic, I know, after seeing the Mid-Staffordshire inquiry. And the core values and behaviour are absolutely essential in great care. The result was, I don't know how they came up with this 6 C's, but they just had this recurring theme where people would say, compassion, that is important, competence is important, commitment's important, yeah? Communication's important, yeah? Courage, it's like a war, I suppose, sometimes when you're trying to save someone, and care, make up the 6 C's, and this has been something that's been drilled through to all NHS staff for many years now, until it filters and brainwashes them into this kind of mantra that they have to behave this way, which is fair enough, very good. A year after that, funnily enough, after this push for some kind of positive footnote on a disastrous decade, even last 30 years, to be honest, with nurse shortages, so many nurses leaving the profession, not being unable to interest young people into the profession, the complaints, the amount of overseas nurses and doctors that have had to replace English or just naturalised people is astounding, really. I mean, even nurses now, they've only gone up maybe 3 or 4%, less than that, less than 3 or 4% in the last decade, as far as their numbers are concerned, where the patients have gone up maybe 5 times, yeah? Which is, obviously, that's why they need overseas people to come, as professionals to come over. In 2013, the Candor Act was launched. No, actually, Candor was defined by the Francis Inquiry, yeah? Where volunteering all relevant information to patients, yeah, was compulsory, and even if the patient didn't complain or ask for information, they were just given the information, yeah, of whatever was about their operation or about their situation. There was the Candor Act then that came out in 2014, between 2014 and 15, and then it was just made law where a health professional would just have to show candour or honesty about every single step that the patient had to go through. So if there was an operation, he or she had to go through it and describe it in detail. If it was going to be terminal, they'd have to say that. The medications involved, the exercises involved, and so on and so forth. So it had to become very transparent all of a sudden, or it'd be breaking the law. If there was no omission of the truth. There was no omissions allowed. So the duty of candour is statutory legal duty to be honest with patients when something goes wrong. So there you go. Okay. That's 3. So moving on, crashing on, we've got the Care Act now, which came sort of around the same time as the duty of candour, which got pushed through Parliament around the same time. And with the Care Act, it's really, I suppose, 6 principles. So when a nurse or doctor's treating a patient, the principles are empowerment, yeah, where you let the patient choose for themselves. Obviously, you can influence them, and you can give them advice, and you can tell them what might be best. You can just give them the information, but obviously you can't choose for them. So what it is it's a personalisation. They are the experts of their own bodies, of themselves, where the doctor or nurse is a professional. And, well, what it is I'm asked what I want as the outcomes from the safeguarding process, and these directly inform what happens. So, the last say ends with the patient. Prevention would be that the nurse or the doctor would intervene to try and stop anything happening to the patient, neglect, disease, just a lack of sanitation, just anything where they could intervene there in the best interest of the patient, and the patient will be well aware of that and be told that, and there'll be complete transparency, complete communication there. And then obviously, we don't want to sort of go over the top. They don't want to do preventative measures that restrict the patient, that can cause depression or just freak out, cause trauma or anything like that to the patient. Because what would happen if, say, I don't know, the patient had an epileptic fit and then they were restrained and then they just forgot about the patient, yeah? Or they thought that the patient should be, I don't know, tied up for longer than it was necessary, then that would be out of proportion, and start calling social services, start calling the police and so on, because they're trying to sort of suggest that they'd harm themselves if they weren't let go, or they'd harm other people. If they didn't understand the nature of an epileptic fit, then they would have just been out of proportion. So proportionality is very important, and it says here, like, I'm sure that the professionals will work for my best interests, that they know, they have good knowledge of what's wrong with me, yeah? And I see them, and will only get involved when it's required, yeah? So, in a situation like an epileptic fit, it's obvious with knowledge that it's not going to be harming anyone, you wouldn't harm the person just go back to normality again, and will decide if they want to take drugs or not, or medication, yeah? Protection, so in that situation, protection is when the patient tells the doctor or the nurse that something's bothering them and that someone is doing something and that they want it to stop perhaps. Obviously, the Confidentiality Act, the Data Protection Act comes into that. But for and foremost, the doctor and the nurse have to protect the patient from whatever harm could be coming to them. So they need to get the police involved, they need to get social workers involved, they need to get other managers involved to make sure that the harm has been removed, yeah? And that could be another professional, all right? Then you've got the partnership. So when the patient leaves the hospital, then it's like they might go home, they might still need help, and they might be vulnerable adults that might be being exploited. That might be young vulnerable girls that might be exploited for sex or whatever. So they need to have social observation. They need the police to check on them, and they need sometimes the local nurse and the GP might need to check them as well, just to make sure that that there's nothing, they're not being abused, as it were. Yeah. You've got accountability as well. So this goes back to the Candor Act in the accountability and transparency in delivering safeguarding. So the patient or the person is well aware of who's taking care of them, is well aware that there can be trust involved, and is well aware of the Candor Act, that they have to be honest and that they have to tell the truth, and that they're only doing it for the protection or the safeguarding of the patient, of themselves, yeah? Alright, I'll quickly run through. So, this is to do with the Candor Act and the Care Act, when you have to take accountability and say sorry when things go wrong. You can't just brush over it, and you have to sort of understand and have empathy for the people involved. The Candor Act prevents doctors and nurses from lying, and if any mistakes were made and any negligence, it has to come to the fore, or it can be a criminal offence, and nurses can go to prison for that. Okay, so categories of abuse during the Care Act. You've got physical abuse, which is obviously just violence. Sexual abuse, coercion, you can say coercion, underage, pressuring people into sex. Psychological abuse can be emotional abuse, threats of abandonment, threats of harm, just verbal abuse. One of the big ones is withdrawing service and support, yeah, just at the wrong times, at the times when you need it most. Financial and material abuse, theft, fraud, you know, like, I don't know, pretending to be someone's friend when really you're just extorting money, telling them that you haven't got money, you haven't got a job yet, you just want, you know, just to borrow the money for now or whatever, go rent free, and then when you get a job, you just go somewhere else, something like that. Exploitation. And yeah, I mean, misappropriation, misuse of property, just using someone's mobile phone, for example, and calling somewhere where they're going to have a big phone bill on it. That could be financial abuse. Possession, benefit abuse. They might want to take your benefit or welfare. So then you've got neglect, acts of omission, so ignoring medical and physical acts, care needs, failure to provide access to appropriate health, care support or educational services, withhold the necessity of life such as medication and adequate nutrition and heating. So, like, a person might have needs here, like in a hospital, they might need nutrition and you might just deliberately hold it back because you don't want them, yeah, for whatever reason. A person might need to go to the toilet and you might do it. So we're going back to Mid-Stafford again, and why these things are so serious and why the Care Act was brought in because it is a type of criminal offence. Self-neglect. This covers a wide range of behaviour. Neglecting to care for one's personal hygiene, health or surrounding. Okay. So yeah, you've got kind of into when it comes to hoarding, for example, or self-neglect, there has to be someone to intervene there to prevent it getting worse and maybe turn it around by having an OCD friend maybe. Proportionality again, like they're still quite proud probably, they don't realise that they're going through it, yeah, they don't realise that there's something wrong, so you still need to give them time. And then there's protection. They need to be protected from themselves and maybe from others, because it might be the first, it might be yeah. And then accountability, again, right? Okay, so that's the Care Act done. We've only got 4 pages, so yeah. On to the Data Protection Act. Alright, the Data Protection Act is to be done, so there's 6 principles, as you can see. First principle is that it's done lawfully. It's done lawfully, fair, transparent. It's lawfully so that there's no deception or fraud, or no fooling governments and trying to do credit fraud or anything like that. It has to be transparent because any hidden documents could get into the wrong hands. It's seen as a form of stealing if you sell it on. Yeah. It can't be misleading as well. Like fair, you can't be misleading people, taking information and selling it or whatever, or just taking a lot of information in order to do something else, and then like not using that information for a particular reason but for another reason. Complying with the law, confidentiality. Okay, so number 2 would be misleading, wouldn't it? Like, okay, it has to be legitimate, specified, explicit. So it has to be up there, they have to be able to retrieve it, they have to be able to look at it, to adjust it, to change it, to even remove it, yeah? They should have those kind of powers in place. The person who's processing it has to be named for whatever reason. Has to be, okay, and if the person wants to destroy it, they should be able to destroy it if they want to, it's their information. You've got like the health record, but the thing about your health record, yeah, everyone has a health record, and it's on the NHS through the national insurance, but that has to be protected, yeah. And it says here that information governance teams should be on display in all patient areas, ensuring that certain conditions in Schedules 2 and 3 in the Act are met. So, the Data Protection Act 2018, the principles are quite simple, really. the data has to be processed in a secure manner as well. No overseas anymore. I'm not sure about 7, that the data must be kept. Oh, it says here that so they've got rid of the right of personal data with the rights of the individual. They've left that one to be accessed. So it can't be accessed anymore, prevented, marketing, it can't stop it being marketed, can't stop it being automated, can't get any compensation if it's damaged, and it can't be rectified, blocked or erased or destroyed if it's inaccurate. And a request from the Information Commissioner will be denied because it's not on the Data Protection Act anymore, but you might get away with it, I don't know. But anyway, as long as the information is not on for longer than necessary and is processed in a secure manner, is all that really matters. There's no more overseas now with the EEA. I think it's to do with Brexit or something. But I mean, that would have to have adequate protection anyway. So then we have juxtaposing with that, with the Data Protection Act, with protecting your information, you've got the Freedom of Information Act. Now, the Data Protection Act of 2018 is more to do with the individual, the person with his national insurance number. But this is to do with the corporations, this is to do with the authorities, this is to do with the governments that are not being transparent, where you have the right to know about your information on their databases. The first thing to remember, as you can see, it's pretty standard. It's where you can retrieve information, and you can retrieve all sorts of different information if you want. The only problem with that is that a lot of people have been retrieving information, not just from the NHS, but from other places like, like driving licence places, the DVLA. You've got people taking the information from councils, but a lot of them have been taking information on behalf of other people, like journalists and companies, employers, for profit-making schemes where they just want to. They're kind of doing it for data and research to make money, which hogs up the system, and sometimes you get people who are just using this system, the freedom of rights information, because they've got nothing better to do. That they just want information on themselves or even on others or whatever, on the particular governing body. Where now they've implemented, or they've started a charge for such time wasted, if you like, because sometimes a person is getting roughly the same information, maybe it's only 3 months apart or whatever, and they want to charge, where I think Ofcom, not Ofcom, but the governing body, the Ombudsman, stipulates that that's the whole point of being able to get information. You should be able to just get information, whatever, even if it's an hour apart, it makes no difference. I mean, that's what's agreed upon. That's what the Act it's saying. The year 2000 Freedom of Information Act. Anyway, that's the data protection. Lovely. So now we're on to this one. So now we're on to human rights at last. And part 1. What is it? It's the English law in 1998. It's enforceable by law, applies to public bodies and hospitals, ensures rights and freedom are upheld by the law. Breaches are accountable by law. Okay. Part 2 is the relevance to the NHS. The NHS have to abide by the Human Rights Act, treat patients in accordance with the Human Rights Act, patients in accordance with the law, and maintain professionalism and with patients, may form basis of legal claims, so you can lose a lot of money. Common topic for training, this is drilled into student nurses, because one day they could make a mistake and they could breach someone's human rights and then they could be sued for negligence. So let's just look at the just a few little sections that are quite controversial anyway. So there's your human rights, there's 16 was going to say to choose from, but obviously not. The most interesting ones, or the best ones, the ones that I'm going to cover now, are the right to life, right to liberty, like when someone's being safeguarded or restrained for whatever reason. That sometimes it can be controversial because, like I said, they might be only having an epileptic fit, or they might just be having mood swings or whatever because they've been doing alcohol or having alcohol. The right to freedom for conscience and religion, that's another controversial one. You've got a lot of Christian nurses that are praying for people, and in the NMC's code of conduct, that is not allowed. So you've got the right to marry and found a family, that's got intraviro fertilisation or viro fertilisation controversy, where when is it right for them to keep trying? Yeah, when is the stop period? Yeah. Let's have a look. You've got right to persecute. Oh yeah, right to peaceful enjoyment of possessions. Right. You've got the right not to be punished or, let's see, torture. Yeah. You've got the right not to be tortured or discriminated against, like for religion. The nurse hasn't got any right to discriminate you for religion. Or if you want to have an abortion, they've got no right. They can only just refer you on. Can't show anything there. Right to, I've done that one. So this one, wait a minute, so what's the one where torture? There, that one, yeah. Treated in a degrading way, like what happened in Staffordshire, where people were just left in the aisles to rot, basically. If you've got a hip replacement and it's going to take 25 hours, you might be stuck on a bed somewhere. So that could be a form of torture if you're in agony, yeah, after an operation, or even before. If you've cracked your hip. All right, so let's get to it then. Right to life. When do you have a right to life? In the Human Rights Act, you've got a limited right, yeah, and then you've got an unlimited right, or it's like it doesn't matter what happens, you have a right overall, yeah. This is the reason for a right to life being limited is because you could be a terrorist or a killer, yeah, or a serial killer or something like that. So not all rights are withheld, yeah, or absolutely. A lot of rights are only limited rights, and it depends on whether citizens need to be protected from someone. Like, for i.e. a terrorist is not going to have a right to life, yeah. The police have a right to kill them, yeah, or the army. So if you look in a medical setting, we could say, for example, Brainstem Death, where you've got like somebody's alive, like their heart's working, but their brain's dead, yeah? They just have a blood supply that's blocked, and once the brain's, they're considered cadaver. A cadaver is just a corpse, yeah? The heart's still beating, yeah? And all it needs is a supply of oxygen, but the lungs aren't working, so it needs the artificial machine to provide that. That would be considered, if you removed a ventilator, to be dead, yeah? Someone dead. And a lot of people have gone to court over that. They've tried to argue that the person's still alive because their heart's still beating, yeah? Even though the rest of them is only functioning with an artificial lung or a ventilator. But they're like, you know, they're far more than a vegetable. They're literally in a coma, yeah? So this is something that's been used to withhold treatment to other people. I think what I can mention here is that this situation in Japan, interestingly enough, because they believe that the spirit is near the thorax, for about 30 years, between 68 and 98, they refused the harvesting of hearts, just heart transplants, because they believed that the person's spirit or whatever had been disrupted if that heart was used in another body. Yeah. So from a human rights point of view, obviously you'd have to sort of go against the donor cards now that are accepting, that are fully acceptant of letting you use hearts, yeah, to go against it, to say you don't want to do a heart donor. Anyway, terrorists, okay, so you've got that, right, and you've also got abortion controversy as well, on the same lines. Whether it's right to terminate a life that isn't out of their mother's vagina, is it vagina? Out of the womb, is it really right to terminate a baby with Down syndrome just because you know it's got Down syndrome now when you didn't know years ago? The reasons why you're terminating are controversial and breaches the right to live, like a lot of people agree. Depending on the state of how you came to be pregnant or how fertilized some conception took place is another factor, yeah, that may have persuaded you to get that termination or abortion, yeah. But there is a lot of Down syndrome children that are terminated that you just don't hear about, and it's pretty graphic indeed. I was reading about the abortion clinics, which are called something totally different, like it was just called Maintaining Life or something. There's always the mother or the child's argument. If the child is born, the mother dies, and vice versa. So the right to life is very complex. But in this situation, unfortunately, a lot of mothers know what the baby is going to be, and they just don't want to be burdened, and they don't want the family burdened, and they're just not going to be able to handle it, and it's just more convenient, I suppose, in many ways. But the thing is, in the NHS's abortion clinics, I think it can go up to 30 weeks. That's more than a fetus or a zygote, yeah? It's an embryo. Okay, so we've got 4. Should have put some water in. You've got the torture, right? So if we go to, so the right not to be tortured, and like I said before about the hip replacement, yeah, you could be just staying in the aisle, or you're not getting enough water, you just pooed yourself and you need the toilet and so on. And you need a shower, isn't it? So just patients being subjected to abuse, to torture. They have no right, a nurse and a doctor have no right to refuse anything that prevents torture, that prevents a form of dehumanization